She got one knee over the sill, and the rose trellis took her weight with a low, complaining creak. The room behind her was wrong. Constance Veer had known it for at least 4 breaths now, since the moment her hand brushed the brass corner of a man's shaving stand instead of the bookcase she had rehearsed in her head. Wrong room, wrong floor, wrong wing entirely. She did not let herself stop to consider what that meant. She slid the small leather portfolio more securely against her ribs, gripped the trellis, and lowered her right boot toward the next strut of green wood and twisted iron. Ravenbury's roses had not yet bloomed in May, but the canes were thick enough to bite through her glove. Good. She wanted them to bite. Pain meant grip. Grip meant escape. Escape meant the deed inside her bodice survived the night. A hand closed around her wrist. It did not pull. It did not shake. It simply closed, fingers warm and absolute. The kind of grip a man uses when he has lifted heavy things all his life and has stopped being surprised by his own strength. She froze on the trellis, with her own pulse loud in her ear. "Wrong room," she whispered. He did not let go. The hand at her wrist did not adjust. It did not press. It simply remained, heavy and warm and patient, as though its owner had decided, at the moment of contact, that he was not in any particular hurry to learn what he had caught. Constance felt the cold spring air between her shoulder blades and the answering heat of his palm at the cuff of her glove, and, beneath both, the small hard rectangle of folded paper at her sternum. Her breath came very level. She had taught herself, since girlhood, to breathe level when she was afraid. Sir Henry had said it was the first lesson of any difficult morning, and most evenings, and the entirety of small hours. "That," said a voice above her, quiet, unrushed, "is becoming clear." The candlelight from inside fell across the back of her wrist and turned her glove the color of weak tea. She tilted her face up only as far as she had to. He was leaning out of the casement window in his shirt sleeves, no coat, no cravat, his dark hair falling forward over a face she recognized from a portrait in the front hall, and one frosted afternoon 9 years ago in the Hyde Park ride. Adrian Bramwell, 6th Duke of Ravenbury, had grown into his shoulders. His eyes, grey, level, unhurried, were the same. "Your Grace," she said, "if you would be so kind as to release my arm, I shall remove myself from your trellis and your evening, and we may both pretend this did not occur." "No." "It is 1 syllable. You could revise." "I could." He did not. She tried, very lightly, to twist. His grip adjusted without tightening. The man was not hurting her. He was simply not negotiating. "Inside," he said. "I beg your pardon?" "Inside, please." It was the please that made her angry. Refusal would have been simpler. Please meant he expected to be obeyed because he had asked nicely, which was the most dangerous expectation a duke could hold over a stranger on a trellis at 1 o'clock in the morning. Constance considered the rose canes, the gravel 2 stories below, and the precise weight of the portfolio at her ribs. She had calculated this descent for 36 hours. Climbing back up was not in the plan. But she had also been raised to read men quickly, and the man holding her wrist had not yet shouted, not yet rung for a footman, not yet asked her name. He was waiting. A duke who waited had decided she was worth waiting for. She set her jaw. "Your Grace, I am going to require my hand for the climb." "I have your hand." "Then you must do most of the climbing." He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth moved a fraction and was checked. He shifted his weight, set his other hand against her shoulder, and lifted her bodily over the casement ledge as though he were rescuing a cat from a high branch. She landed on his bedroom rug in a flurry of muddied petticoats and the still burning resentment of a woman who had fully intended to make her own exit. "Sit," he said. "I prefer to stand." "Sit." There was a chair by the writing desk. She sat in it, because she had not yet decided what to do with her hands. He shut the window. He closed the curtain. He went to the door, turned the key in the lock, and put the key in the pocket of his waistcoat. "Now," said the Duke of Ravenbury, in a tone of perfectly polite curiosity. "Your name?" "Pruitt." "Christian name?" "Mary." "Mary Pruitt." "Yes." "You came in through which entrance, Mary Pruitt?" "The East Terrace door. It was unbolted." "It was not." "Then I do not know how I came in." "That also is becoming clear." He had crossed his arms. He was not glowering at her. He was examining her. The cut of her cloak, the leather of her boots, the gloves that were too good for a maid and too plain for a guest, the dust on her knees. His face did nothing she could read except think. She hated being thought at. "Mary Pruitt, lady's maid," she offered, since silence was worse. "Of Hertfordshire." "Whose?" "Mrs. Carruthers, of Tring." "Mrs. Carruthers of Tring is in Brighton until Whitsun." "Then she will not miss me." He looked at her for a long moment. The fire on the far hearth had burnt down to a flat ruby bed, and the lamp on the writing desk was the only steady light in the room. It threw the Duke's profile in 3/4, half ink and half candle flame, and held him there. He had not raised his voice. He had not crossed the carpet. He had not, and Constance, watching the small economies of his face, registered this with a precision that startled her, looked once at the door, the bell pull, or the window. He was paying her, inattention. The kind of careful, sustained interest a clerk pays a column of figures he knows to be wrong, but does not yet know how. It was, she realized, the most flattering examination she had ever survived, and she resented it on principle. "Mary Pruitt," he said gently, "puts her vows where my mother put hers. She would not have learned them in service. Try again." The fire had been allowed to burn low. The shadows on his bookshelves were the shapes of standing men. Constance could feel the deed inside her bodice as a small, heated weight against her sternum, and she thought, quite clearly, the way one thinks at a great height, that she had 3 options. She could weep, which she could not do convincingly without practice. She could faint, which she could not do at all. Or she could refuse to give him a name and see what he did with the silence. She chose silence. "Very well," said the Duke. He rang the bell. A footman appeared, with the calm immediacy of a man who had been awake for some time. The Duke murmured to him in the doorway. The footman murmured back. The door closed. "Mrs. Hannity will bring tea," the Duke said. "I do not want tea." "It is not for what you want. It is to give my housekeeper a reason to be on this corridor at 1 in the morning, so that I may sit alone with you for a quarter of an hour without ruining you in the process. Drink it slowly." Constance, who had been prepared for almost any threat, was not prepared for this one. He had reached, instinctively, for her reputation before her wrists. The understanding sat in her chest like a swallowed coin. "You are being kind," she said, and was surprised to hear that her voice had gone flat. "I am being thorough," he said. "Kindness has not yet been determined." He sat at the writing desk, drew the brass desk lamp closer, and turned the wick up another half-inch. The yellow light pooled across the blotter and across the back of his hands. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. There was a smear of ink on the inside of his forearm, and a smear of fatigue under each grey eye. He had been working when he heard her in the wrong room. He had been working at 1 o'clock on the night of his own ball, while 3 counties' worth of guests laughed downstairs, and his orchestra played the second cotillion. The brass lamp had not been lit for show. It had been lit for ledgers. He pushed an open folio toward her without rising. "This is the Ravenbury Home Farm account for the last 4 quarters, he said. "If you came to my house to steal something, I would prefer it not be that, since by the look of it I have already lost £600 I cannot find." She looked down at the page out of pure reflex. a long column of figures in a neat clerk's hand. A line of marginalia in a different ink, rounder, less practiced. The figures on the second column did not, she saw at once, agree with the figures on the first. "Your steward keeps 2 tallies," she heard herself say. The Duke's head came up. "Beg pardon?" "The seed barley entry on Lady Day. He has it at £3.8 in this column and £4.2 in the marginal note, and the marginal note is in his own hand. He is reconciling against himself." There was a pause. "You read Mary Pruitt's lines very fast, Mary Pruitt," said the Duke of Ravenbury. She closed the folio. "It was a guess." It was not a guess. The footman returned with the tea tray, and a discreet, grey-haired woman in a black dress, who set the tray down, set the door open by half an inch, and stationed herself in the corridor with the placid alertness of a guard who has been a guard since before either of them was born. The Duke did not look at her. Constance did not need to. They both understood the geometry now. Locked door, then half-open door. Ruin avoided by 2 inches. He poured the tea himself. He pushed the cup toward her. He did not speak again for nearly a full minute. The clock on the mantelpiece, gilt and inoffensive, marked 1:20. "Mary Pruitt," he said at last, "I will give you the rest of the night to think. There is a small antechamber off this room. Mrs. Hannity will sit in it with you, on the other side of the door, and she will be perfectly comfortable, and so will you. In the morning, when I have slept and you have slept, I will ask you again. If you give me the same answer, I will send for a magistrate, and his question will be less polite than mine. Do you understand?" "Perfectly." "Good." He stood up. He put the brass key from his pocket onto the desk where she could see it, and then he picked it up again and gave it to Mrs. Hannity in the corridor, which Constance found, on reflection, more flattering than the locking had been. "One more question," he said, with his hand on the door. "Ask. Did you mean to take anything from this house?" "Yes." "What?" "Nothing of yours." His grey eyes rested on her face. Whatever he was reading there, he did not interrupt himself to share. He inclined his head, not a bow, not a dismissal, the small, precise gesture of a man who is deferring an argument because he intends to win it later, and went out. She heard the bolt of the antechamber door slide. She heard Mrs. Hannity settle into a chair. She heard the brass desk lamp being lifted, carried into the antechamber, set down on a low table beside her. The light was warm and yellow, and absolutely steady. Constance sat in it for a long time before she allowed herself to breathe properly. The deed at her sternum had not moved. The night was not yet lost. She had until breakfast to decide whether to give him her name. The lamp burned with a small, faithful sound. The wick made the faintest hiss when it drew on the oil. The brass collar, warmed by the flame, gave off a scent that was almost vanilla, and not quite metal. Outside the antechamber window, the night was the dense, country dark of a hall set in 500 acres of its own park, and the river below the lawn ran on without comment. A clock somewhere in the house struck 2. Then, after a careful interval, the half. Constance noticed for the first time that the clock at Ravenbury was very slightly slow. Pip's small claws ticked across the parquet on the other side of the door, paused, and went away again. Mrs. Hannity, in her chair, did not look up from her knitting. She was working, Constance saw, on a sock for a child whose foot she had measured against her own forearm. She did not sleep. She could have. The little settee in the antechamber was kinder than her bed at home, and Mrs. Hannity, who had appointed herself to a chair 4 feet away and a knitting bag at her feet, had the gift of being silently present without watching. But Constance had not climbed a trellis at midnight in order to lie down, and she had not given a false name in order to forget what was true. She sat upright, with her knees drawn under her cloak, and the brass lamp throwing her own shadow onto the wall like a second self. She thought about her father. He had been gone 3 Aprils now. Sir Henry had slipped from her on a slow spring fever, in his own bed, with her hand under his, and his other hand still resting on the rim of a teacup he had not finished. Sir Henry Vere had been, she made herself say it, in her head, because she had not used the word often enough since he was lost. A reasonable man. He had borne his last fever the way he had borne his small estate and his unfortunate younger brother, and his middle-aged delight in finally having a daughter who liked horses, with patience, particularity, and a dry sense of his own absurdity. His last clear sentence had been a whispered instruction. "Connie," he had said, with the careful diction of a man refusing to die untidily. "The deed of trust on the Cheriton Dower House. Ravenbury has it. Your uncle put it in his hand last summer. Do not let your aunt sell what is not hers." She had whispered back, "I won't, Papa." His next sentence, 20 minutes later, had been about toast. The Cheriton Dower House had been her mother's. It would, by the deed, be Constance's the moment she married or turned 30, whichever came first. Her aunt, who had been managing matters of the estate since Constance was 16, had told the family solicitor with great regret that the deed could not be found, and very probably had never existed. Constance was 26. She had 9 months left. Her aunt had a buyer. She had written twice to the steward of Ravenbury Hall, Mr. Pell, asking, with all proper humility, whether the late Duke of Ravenbury had taken charge of any document belonging to Sir Henry Vere of Hertfordshire. "Madam," Mr. Pell had replied twice, "no such document exists in the Ravenbury archive." The third letter she wrote, he had not answered. The silence, she thought now, had been its own confession. A steward who refuses a third letter is a steward who knows the second one was a lie. So she had borrowed a maid's plain cloak, read every map of the hall the village librarian could lend her, befriended the second under-gardener's daughter in the village inn under a false name, and learned where in the east wing the late Duke's private papers were stored, and which window had a trellis. She had counted, on her 2 midnight reconnaissance walks past the orchard wall, 3 windows from the chapel side. She had counted 3. The east wing began at the chapel. The window with the trellis was 3 down. It was 3 down. It had been 3 down. Except the chapel had been re-roofed last autumn, and the new gable had eaten 1 window's worth of wall, and Constance, careful, particular Constance, had counted 3 from the wrong landmark. She had climbed into the Duke's bedroom. She had not taken anything from his bedroom. The deed she had come for was already in her possession. She had retrieved it from the late Duke's locked study at the far end of the same corridor, a study that had been left untouched, Mrs. Hannity had said to the under-gardener's daughter in the inn, out of respect for his late lordship, as if respect could be a lock. The deed had been in a drawer marked Vere, in a folder marked Vere, in a clerk's pristine copperplate, that proved her father had not been the kind of man whose papers were difficult to find. She had folded it, once, twice, and pressed it inside her bodice, and she had walked back along the corridor, and she had, counting backwards now, entered, by mistake, the wrong door. A door, she had whispered to herself on the trellis, that had refused to be the right door for any reason she could articulate to a magistrate. She put her cheek against the back of the settee, and felt the deed in its place. "What will he do?" she whispered to no one. The brass lamp did not answer. If she gave Adrian Bramwell her name in the morning, he would have several options. He could believe her. He could pretend to believe her and quietly send for her aunt. He could refuse to believe her and demand the deed for examination, and she would, in good conscience, hand it to him because the deed was either valid or it was not, and a man who kept his own ledgers at 1 in the morning was not a man who would steal a paper from a stranger. Probably. Possibly. Or she could refuse to give him her name and let him send for the magistrate, and at the magistrate be told by her aunt's solicitor that Constance Vere of Ashurst had been seen in the village under another name. It would be the end of everything, she whispered, and the words demanded a kind of honesty she had been avoiding all night. The end of the deed. The end of the Dower House. The end, probably, in the polite imagination of 3 counties, of Constance herself. The brass lamp made a small stutter. Mrs. Hannity, without looking, leaned over and trimmed the wick. The light steadied. By 4 o'clock, Constance had decided. She had not decided rationally. Her father would have been displeased with her arithmetic. She had decided because she had remembered the way the Duke's hand had closed on her wrist on the trellis. Warm, absolute, not crushing. And because a man whose first instinct, on catching a thief at his window, was to send for a chaperone before he asked for a name, was not a man who was going to ruin her. She would give him the truth. She would give it in a particular order. She would not weep. She would, if necessary, climb back out of his window in her own time. Mrs. Hannity, without raising her head from her knitting, said, "You'll want to lie down, miss. He'll come at 8. "How do you know?" "He always comes at 8. The needles clicked. "At 8, Mrs. Hannity said, "he's slept. Before 8, he's a duke." He came at 1 minute past 8, which was, Constance discovered, his version of being late. He had shaved. He had put on a coat, indigo, very plain, bath superfine. He had brought a tray, on which were 2 cups, a small pot, and a covered dish. He set the tray on the writing desk in the outer room and stood beside it with his hands behind his back, like a man who had given some thought to what posture he ought to adopt. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Your Grace. Did you sleep?" "Not a great deal." "Mrs. Hannity says you read for some of it." "I read your home farm account." He had not been expecting that. The corner of his mouth did the same thing it had done on the trellis, and again it was checked. "What do you make of it?" "Mr. Pell," said Constance, "has been putting one set of figures into your private ledger, and a different set into the marginal column for at least 6 quarters. The differences are small in any single line and consistent in direction. He is taking, by my arithmetic, between £4 and £7 a month, which over 4 years is rather more than the 600 you mentioned. I would also examine the haymaking accounts. The wage list does not match the day list." The Duke did not move for several seconds. "Sit down," he said, without inflection. "Eat the toast. Pour the tea. Then, tell me your name." She sat. She poured. She cut the toast in half, because Sir Henry Vere had taught her that nothing serious was ever discussed over a whole piece of toast. "My name," she said, "is Constance Vere. My father was Sir Henry Vere of Ashurst. He was lost to us 3 years ago in April." The Duke set his own cup down so carefully it made no sound. "Sir Henry," he said, "was my father's friend." "Yes. He visited here in the spring of 11. "He did?" "You were the child on the chestnut." "I was." He let out a single short breath. It was not a laugh. "Constance," he said, and stopped, and looked at her as though he were rearranging something behind his face. "What did you come for?" "I came for the deed of trust on the Cheriton Dower House, which my father sent into your father's keeping in the summer of 23, and which your steward, Mr. Pell, has, in writing, twice denied exists. It does exist. I have it. It was in a drawer marked Vere in your late father's study. I will give it to you to verify, and I will trust you to return it to me when you have." She drew the deed from her bodice, one motion, brisk, uncoquettish, and set it on the desk between them, and pushed it the inch and a half required to make it his. He did not pick it up. He looked at it, then he looked at her hand, still resting beside it, and then he looked at her face. "Lady Constance," he said, and the lady was a small correction he gave her with great care, the way one straightens a portrait on a wall. "Do you have any idea how badly I have wanted to find that paper for 6 months?" "No." 6 months. Since Christmas. Your aunt's solicitor wrote me twice asking me to confirm that no such document existed in the Ravenbury archive. I asked Pell. Pell said no such document existed. I asked Pell again in writing last month. Pell said no such document existed. I had decided, 3 days ago, that I disbelieved him. Why? because Pell has begun lying with his shoulders before he lies with his mouth, and I've been watching his shoulders since February." She looked at him. "You knew?" "I suspected. And you let me into your house at midnight." "I did not," said the Duke gravely. "Let you anywhere. You climbed in. I caught you climbing back out. Those are two different things." There was another short silence, and then, slowly, against her own intention, Constance laughed. It was not a long laugh. It had the slightly cracked edge of a person who had not slept and had been afraid for 9 hours, and had only now permitted herself to admit that she was no longer in danger. It surprised her. It surprised him more. He stared at her, and the grey of his eyes warmed by the smallest possible margin. And he did not, this time, check the corner of his mouth. "Lady Constance," he said, "will you eat?" "Thank you, Your Grace. I will." "Adrian." She blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Sir Henry called my father by his Christian name from when they were both 17. He called me Adrian. We are not going to do this in titles, you and I. Not after the trellis." "Then you will have to call me Constance." "I had been planning to." She ate the toast. The tea was excellent. The brass desk lamp had been put out, and the morning sun lay on the blotter where it had been, and outside in the rose garden, something small and grey came tearing along the gravel path, with the agitated importance of a creature with a stick that mattered. "What is that?" "That," said the Duke, with the resigned weariness of a man defending a beloved, "is Pip." A grey terrier rounded the corner, saw the open window, and arrived through it in one decisive scramble. He deposited a wet stick on the rug, sat on Constance's left boot, and looked at her with an expression of grave, personal interest. "He's yours." "He thinks I'm his." "Pip, get off the lady." Pip did not. Constance, who had been raised in a house with 3 terriers, scratched the ridge of his head in the precise place behind his right ear that all terriers required, and most strangers missed. Pip sighed. He laid his chin on her boot. "Well," said the Duke. "He has good judgment," said Constance. "He does, occasionally." He picked up the deed at last. He read it with the unhurried particular attention he had given the home farm account. He folded it. He laid it back down between them. "This is in order," he said. "I will have Hartwell, my own solicitor, not Pell's brother, examine it formally this afternoon. By the end of the week, the Cheriton Dower House will be returned to your possession. Your aunt will be informed, by Hartwell, in writing." "Thank you." "It is not gratitude. It is a debt my house owes yours. Pell is a separate matter. I will deal with him today." "Adrian." He looked up. It was the first time she had used the name. He found it remarkable enough to be still for it. "Pell," she said, "will not deal cleanly. He has a brother-in-law who is a magistrate in this county. He will know by mid-morning that I am here. He will go to the magistrate. He will say I broke into your house, which is true, and he will say I stole a paper from your archive, which is a defensible claim in a court that does not love my surname. He will also, given a day to think, blacken me publicly to protect himself." "Yes," said the Duke, "he will. I have thought of all of that. I am not at present at liberty to have you ruined, Constance, so we are going to have to handle Mr. Pell rather carefully. Will you stay here 3 days?" "Here?" "In this house, in the south guest wing, which is my aunt's wing, with my aunt in residence, who arrived an hour ago. She is, to be frank, sleeping upstairs, but I have not told her yet that you are arriving and will be installed before she wakes. By the time she rings for chocolate at 11, you will have been her invited guest since Tuesday." "And the village?" "The village will be told you are the daughter of an old friend of my father, which is true. The ball was last night and the house is full of guests. A dozen ladies will be installed by lunchtime. Yours will not be the only late arrival." We will manage. And Pell? Pell, said the Duke, is going to become extremely visible to me until he becomes invisible to everyone else. She studied him. The morning had put colour back into his face. He looked less tired and considerably more dangerous. Adrian, she said carefully, why are you doing this? You owe Sir Henry's daughter a paper. You do not owe her 3 days of your aunt. He set down the cup. Because, he said, I have spent 6 months unable to make the figures in this folio agree with each other, and you found the disagreement in 14 seconds. Because I cannot ask your help and then permit you to be ruined for having given it. And because the late Duke of Ravenbury, to whom Sir Henry trusted a paper, was a man who would have come down those stairs himself and brought you tea. And I would prefer to be that kind of Duke. Will that do? It will do. Good, said the Duke. Mrs. Hannity will see you to the south wing. There is a green dressing gown, my sister's, that will fit you reasonably until your trunk arrives from Ashurst, which Hartwell will arrange for by tomorrow. Sleep. Properly, this time. We will dine at 4. I will bring you the wage list and the day list of the haymaking, and we will see what you can do with them. I am not actually a clerk, Adrian. I am aware. I will not pay you in pennies. What will you pay me in? Tea, said the Duke gravely. And dignity. The morning thinned. Light moved across the breakfast room in pale, mineral bars, catching on the silver, on the chipped enamel of an old saucer Pip insisted on the corner of a clean napkin. The hearth smelled faintly of last night's apple wood. Outside, a wood pigeon kept up its slow, foolish argument with itself in the cedar by the south wall. Constance felt the warm weight of the cup against her palm and the tea steady inside it. She tasted bergamot and bee balm and a sugar that had not been stretched. Somewhere down the corridor a door clicked open, then closed, and a maid's footsteps moved off, carrying a copper jug. The hall had begun the work of the day around her without comment, the way a horse will breathe through a cold morning. By that afternoon, the south wing had been opened, the green dressing gown had been delivered, and Pip had selected, against the Duke's authority, the foot of Constance's borrowed bed as his official sleeping post. Mrs. Hannity had brought up a tray, 3 silver pins, and the calm announcement that the Duke's aunt, Lady Aurelia Bramwell, was now informed of the dear Vere girl's arrival, and was charmed. Constance, who had never been called the dear Vere girl by anyone, took the tray and the deed receipt Hartwell had left her, and sat at the small writing desk by the window, in her green wrap with the spring sun on her hands, and tried to think clearly. She did not, at first, succeed. The morning had gone too well. Adrian Bramwell had not been any of the dukes she had prepared for. He had not been pompous. He had not been seducible. He had not been cruel. He had not, even briefly, been stupid. He had simply paid attention to her hands, to her arithmetic, to the small slip of Adrian on her tongue, with the steady accuracy of a man who paid attention to everything, because that was how his land kept producing crops, and his tenants kept paying their rents, and his sister's terrier kept being fed at the right hour. He had also, she realized, been 27 hours from working through a problem he had not been able to solve, and she had handed him a piece of it in 14 seconds, and he had not been embarrassed. He had been pleased. It was a long time since anyone had been pleased to be corrected by Constance Vere. She was halfway through the haymaking day list. It was, indeed, 3 men short of the wage list every Friday, when there was a low scratch at her door. Come. Adrian opened the door 6 inches. Pip got up off the bed and went to him. My aunt, he said, is asking after you. Are you equal to a 15-minute call? Now? In 10 minutes. I will accompany you. She is a gentle creature, but she is keen, and she is going to remember you. We need her to remember you favorably. What does favorably entail? Telling her that you used to have a chestnut pony called Cricket, and that Sir Henry held the pony's bridle, and that I, on that visit, fell off Cricket into a horse trough. None of this is invented. All of it is in her diary. She will check. Constance looked at him. Did you fall off, Cricket? I did. You laughed. I do not remember that. I do. He shut the door. She heard his footfall going down the corridor, and Pip's nails clicking after him. And then, quite distinctly, Pip's nails clicking back. She let him in. Pip, she said, you have to choose. Pip, in a gesture of unmistakable diplomacy, lay down on the rug exactly halfway between the door he had come through and the bed he had come from. The dressing for dinner took on the shape of a small ceremony. Mrs. Hannity, with the patient hands of a woman who had laced more bodices than she had counted Sundays, drew Constance's hair into a low chignon and pressed 2 fresh rose leaves into the comb at her nape, because, she said, the conservatory had given them up willingly, and Duke's aunts liked the small touches. The borrowed silk smelled faintly of cedar from the chest it had come out of, and of dried lavender from the sachet that had ridden inside the folds. The hem brushed Constance's ankle when she stood, a low, dry whisper of a sound, and she discovered, with a private smile, that the colour of the dress, a deep, river-shadowed green, was almost exactly the green of the wrap she had not yet stopped wearing in private. Downstairs, distantly, someone struck a single warning note on the pianoforte and stopped. The hall settled itself for an evening. Lady Aurelia turned out to be 60, lavender-silked, sharp-eyed, and easily the sweetest interrogator Constance had ever sat opposite. Within 4 minutes, she had confirmed cricket, the horse trough, Sir Henry's preferred cigar, and Adrian's regrettable habit at 8 years old of bringing live frogs into the music room. Within 7, she had accepted, on grounds Constance could not name, that Constance had been her dear Vere girl since Tuesday. Within 12, she had declared that Constance must by all means stay through the week. The week, Adrian, do not be tedious. And that she required Constance to come down to the long drawing room every evening, because a woman of 60 had earned the right to 1 decent conversation per dinner. Constance, who had walked into the room expecting at best wary tolerance, walked out of it under a very firm small white hand, and the words, "Come along, my dear. I am going to pretend I have always known you," which is, in any case, true at my age. Adrian followed at 3 paces, hands behind his back. When the drawing-room door had closed behind them, he leaned against the corridor wall and exhaled. "Well done," she said. "You did all of it," he said. "You stood very straight." "I stood like a man who wanted to be believed, and was." She looked sideways at him. "Adrian, have you spoken to Pell?" "At noon." "And?" "He is, as I expected, an excellent steward. He resigned with great dignity on the grounds of his recent attack of the gout, before I had quite finished asking him whether he had ever falsified a barley account. By 2 o'clock he was in his own carriage with 3 trunks. By 4 he will have written to his brother-in-law, the magistrate. By morning, the village will know I have parted from my steward of 14 years on disgraceful terms, but it will not know whose disgrace, and Pell will be making sure that ambiguity is resolved by Sunday. In whose favour? His. By accusing me. By accusing you of having seduced a duke into dismissing his loyal steward. That is creative. He has had 3 hours. She considered. She rubbed her thumb along the cuff of the green wrap. "Adrian, you will need a counter-narrative by Sunday." "Yes." "I have one." "Of course you do." "There is going to be a county dinner here on Saturday, is there not?" "Because there always is, after the spring ball, for the gentry too senior to attend the ball but too important to skip. Lady Aurelia mentioned it twice." "There is." "Sir Lionel Pell, the magistrate, will be invited." "He will." "Invite my aunt's solicitor as well, Mr. Hartwell, and ask Hartwell to bring a clerk and a folio." "Why?" "Because if Sir Lionel attempts, at your dinner, in front of 40 witnesses, to suggest that I have stolen anything from this house, I should very much like Mr. Hartwell at hand to read aloud from the folio that the exact paper Sir Lionel will be referring to is, in the eyes of the law, mine. Loudly. With the date of my father's letter to your father, with 3 witnesses' signatures, with your steward's 2 false replies on Ravenbury notepaper." He looked at her for a long, thinking second. Constance. Yes? You have been planning this for fewer than 90 seconds. I have been planning this since I climbed up the trellis. You did not know about Pell when you climbed up the trellis. I did not. But I knew, at the bottom, that if anything went wrong I was going to end up at a county dinner, because something always does. And my father always said that a Vere who cannot win a county dinner does not deserve a Vere's name. Sir Henry, said the Duke with feeling, missed his calling as a strategist. Sir Henry, said his daughter, found it. He was raising me. The hall woke in the way old houses do, by degrees. First the kitchen flue, then the scullery pump with its low brass cough, then a maid's barefooted run along the back stair, then her boots, then the long, careful drag of curtains being opened in rooms still empty of their people. Constance learned the order of these small noises the way a traveller learns the order of a new bell tower. By the third morning she could tell, lying with her eyes closed and Pip's warm flank against her hip, that it was 6:20, and the second undercook had dropped a pan and was being mildly sworn at. The smell of the place was wood smoke and beeswax, and, at certain doors, the dry, cool note of old paper. The air at her bedroom window, when she opened it for a moment before dressing, came in cold off the orchard wall and tasted of cut grass and rain that had not yet arrived. The next 3 days had a new shape to them, and Constance, who had spent the last 3 years counting her aunt's footsteps on the stair and the cost of every inch of black bombazine, discovered with mild alarm that she liked the shape. Mornings were the home farm folio in the Duke's study. Afternoons were the haymaking day list, the wage list, the rent rolls of the 3 Ravenbury home villages, and a small green ledger that Mrs. Hannity, with no comment whatever, had produced from a locked cupboard in the housekeeper's room and laid in front of Constance with a pot of black tea. The ledger was not Pell's. It was the late Duke's, and it listed what Constance recognized on the second page as a private account of trust papers held on behalf of friends, including, halfway down the third page, Vere, Cheriton Dower Deed, received 12, August 23, act to S.H.V. by post. The deed had not, in fact, been hidden. Pell had simply lied that it had been. The late Duke had told no one but his housekeeper, because the late Duke had also possessed the disconcerting habit of telling no one but his housekeeper a great many things. I like your father, Constance said. I miss him every Wednesday, the Duke said, and did not explain why Wednesday. And Constance, who understood the precise grief of small, recurring days, did not ask. She did not always work alone. He sat opposite her at the long study table, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for 3. He brought ledgers. He brought a second cup. He brought, occasionally, Pip, who had decided that the only acceptable sleeping place in any room was directly between Constance's stockinged feet, which he treated as a mobile bed warmer and a personal duty. The Duke worked beside her in silence. Long, unself-conscious silence. The kind that could exist only between 2 people who had read too many ledgers in their lives and had stopped requiring conversation to keep each other company. There were small mercies that defined the shape of those days. The unself-conscious mercies that her father's house had stopped being able to give her after he was gone. The fire was always lit before she came down. Her cup was always to her left, never to her right. Mrs. Hannity had observed, on the first morning, that Constance reached with her left hand for tea and with her right for the pen, and had put the cup where she would not have to interrupt her arithmetic to drink. The brass desk lamp was trimmed twice a day, once at noon and once at 5, with a tiny pair of silver scissors Mrs. Hannity carried in a black leather pouch on a chatelaine. The wick burned clean and steady because of these scissors, and Constance had begun to find the small ceremony of the wick trimming oddly soothing. The click of the scissors, the brief drop of the flame to the size of a pea, the slow widening as the new edge of the wick caught and swelled. She was conscious, more than she wanted to be, that none of these mercies had been arranged by the Duke himself. He had simply hired the women who would arrange them, She found this more flattering, on balance, than any direct attention he could have paid her. A man who had made his house comfortable to live in by the careful selection of women like Mrs. Hannity was a man who, when he was good without making a performance of it. She thought about that on the second evening, when Adrian was away in the home village dealing with the tenant's burst dam, and she sat alone at the long study table in the green wrap with the brass lamp and the open ledger. She had reached the end of an entire afternoon's column of figures without once needing to ask anyone for anything. Her father, in a quiet stretch of his last summer, had said to her, over a similar table with a similar lamp, "Connie, the test of a household is not whether the master is generous in his presence. It is whether the household functions when he is not in it." Sir Henry had said many things in his last summer. She had, since being lost from him, played the sayings over in her head like a habit, sometimes for comfort, sometimes for guidance, sometimes for the specific small ache of his voice, which she could already feel the edges of beginning to wear. Tonight, in Adrian's absent house, she heard the saying again and understood, with a clarity that startled her, that the test had been passed. It was not a flattering thought to entertain about a man one had known for 60 hours. She closed the ledger. She put both hands flat on its leather cover and held them there until the heat of her own palms warmed the grain. When they did speak, it was mostly the work. "Look at this entry. That column is wrong by 3. I do not believe Pell wrote this in February. The loop on his G changes. But occasionally—" "Constance? You have ink on your cheek." "I always have ink on my cheek. Sir Henry said it was the visible evidence of my mind being improperly employed." "It suits you." She had looked up then. He had not been looking at her cheek. He had been looking at her mouth, and he had immediately, like a man who had heard himself mid-sentence, returned his eyes to the page in front of him and turned over a leaf. "You were saying about February," she had said. "I was saying," said the Duke in a steadier tone, "that Pell has been a thief for at least a year, possibly 2. 2 and a quarter. Constance. You are making a list of his lies in the margin of my private ledger. I will copy them out fair and burn the page." "Do not. I want to keep them. They are very neat." She had bent her head over the ledger again, and her cheek had gone, against her own will, slightly warm, and Pip, who never missed anything, had thumped his tail twice on her left foot, in approval. A note arrived on Friday morning that Constance had not been expecting. It was sealed with a smear of black wax pressed by an unfamiliar signet, addressed to her at Ravenbury, in a hand she did not know, and delivered into Mrs. Hannity's keeping by a boy from the home village who had refused to give his name. Mrs. Hannity, against her own preference, had brought it up with the breakfast tray. Constance opened it, standing at the window in a square of cool May light. The note was 3 lines. "Lady Constance, those who shelter under another roof should be careful which roof they make use of. The roof at Ashurst is not as sound as you remember. A friend." The handwriting was deliberately irregular, the way a clever person disguises a hand by writing it left-handed. The R's tilted backward in a way that did not match anything else on the page. She held the note over the lamp and let the sun catch the indentations the writer had made in the paper. Pell had sent it. He had sent it on Ravenbury notepaper. The watermark in the corner was Ravenbury's own. He had taken a sheet of his late employer's paper with him on the way out of the door and used it to threaten her 4 days later, which told her 2 things: that he was frightened, and that he was vain enough to want her to know exactly who was frightening her. She folded the note. She put it on the Duke's desk, under the brass lamp, where he would find it at noon. By the time he found it, she had given the kitchen garden boy a half-crown, 3 bread rolls, and the address of her father's old groom in the village above Ashurst, in case he met another note-bearer who needed redirection. On Friday evening, Adrian came into the study very late and stood in the doorway with one hand braced against the frame and a piece of notepaper in the other. "Sir Lionel Pell," he said, "has accepted my invitation to Saturday's dinner. He has also written to my aunt suggesting, in 3 carefully phrased sentences, that her young guest is the person who was seen in the village inn last week, under another name, asking questions about the late Duke's papers. He is recommending, with regret, that my aunt consider the lady's reputation before continuing to receive her. Did you let your aunt read it? My aunt opened it before I did. Aunt Aurelia has not given a letter to a man since 1793. She has burnt it. She burnt the magistrate's letter. She burnt it in the breakfast room grate. Then she rang for a kipper. Adrian. Yes? Your aunt is a national treasure. I am aware. He had crossed to the long study window while he spoke, and stood with his back half to her, looking down across the south lawn where Pip had located, in the further hedge, an unidentified small creature he intended to bark at on principle. The afternoon light came in at a low angle, and lay along the Duke's shoulder and the soft inside of his rolled-up sleeve. He had ink on the inside of his right wrist again. Constance had begun to recognize the particular smudge, a single fingerprint, never two, as the mark of a man who, unconsciously, rested the heel of his hand on a wet line of his own writing whenever he was thinking too quickly. She had begun, against every instinct of her training, to find it endearing. He came in and sat opposite her and put the second sheet, Hartwell's note, in front of her. The solicitor had read the deed, found it unimpeachable, and sent a clerk with 3 fair copies. Hartwell himself would be at the dinner. He would bring the green ledger, the deed, the home farm folio, and the false letters Pell had written to Constance under the steward's seal. He had requested permission, with the dryness of a man who had been a country solicitor for 30 years, to be seated somewhere with adequate visibility. He is going to enjoy himself, said the Duke. Hartwell? Hartwell has waited 3 years to see Pell removed from this estate. He has agreed to read the deed aloud at any moment of my choosing. He has also offered, should the occasion arise, to read the home farm marginalia. He is a darling. He is a country solicitor. They contain multitudes. She set down her pen. Adrian. Yes. This is not going to be polite. No. You are quite certain you wish to host it under your own roof? He looked at her across the table. The brass desk lamp lit the underside of his jaw and the line of his throat above his cravat. He had not slept much either in 3 days. He had, it dawned on her, been sleeping less and less since she had come into the house. Constance, he said, it was always going to be under my roof. The question is only whether you will be standing next to me when it begins. I will. Then it will be polite enough. Outside the study window, the night did its slow practical work. A barn owl called twice, low and exact, from the cedar. A horse stamped once in the home stable. The hour bell, when it struck 4. The brass note traveled out across the lawns and met the river, and was gone. Constance, in her room, did not undress. She sat at the small writing desk in the green wrap, with her hair down her back, and wrote out, in clear copperplate, a list of every column in the home farm folio she could remember. She wrote until her hand ached. Then she trimmed the wick of her candle with the small steel scissors Mrs. Hannity had laid beside it, blew out the flame, and watched the dark gather along the carpet from the fender to the door. Sleep, when it came on her own terms. Saturday came up cool and bright, the late spring kind of morning that smells of wet box hedge and warm gravel and the trellis canes Adrian's gardener had been pruning since dawn. Constance woke before the bells of the home village church had rung 6. She lay very still on her back in the green wrap and looked at the cornicing of her borrowed bedroom, vine and wheat ear, and a small repeating ribbon, and counted the number of breaths she could draw before her chest did the small involuntary catch she had learned to recognize as anticipatory fear. She got to 9. Sir Henry had said that the morning of any difficult evening should begin with 1 hour of doing something that has nothing to do with the evening. He had recommended walking, breakfast, or a horse, in roughly that order. Constance, who had no horse and was disinclined to break her fast at 6, dressed in her plainest morning gown, and went down the back stair to the kitchen garden. Mrs. Hannity, who was already awake because Mrs. Hannity was always already awake, met her at the still-room door with a basket and a pair of secateurs, and the unsentimental observation that the rosemary by the south wall needed cutting, and Constance might as well do something useful with her nerves. Constance cut rosemary for 40 minutes. Pip, who had elected himself to her morning detail, brought her a stick that was, by his standards, only moderately important. The smell of the cut leaves stayed on her gloves all morning, sharp and resinous and oddly steadying, and she carried it into the long drawing room when Lady Aurelia came down at 9, and the lady noticed it and said nothing about it and was, Constance understood, approving. She wore the emerald. It was the only ball gown her aunt had not packed when Constance left Ashurst with one valise and a story about a christening. Her father's final maid, Bessie, had pressed it into Constance's trunk in defiance of the household with the words, "If you are going to be ruined by your aunt for this, miss, you might as well be ruined in green." Bessie had been right. The deep green silk took the candlelight at the dining room sideboard and gave it back warmer than it had arrived. Lady Aurelia, when Constance came down at 5 minutes past 7, set a small white hand against her own throat and said, "Adrian, look at this child. She is going to be insufferable," in a voice of thoroughly satisfied prediction. Adrian looked. He did not, this time, immediately return his eyes to anything else. "Lady Constance," he said, and the formality was for the watching butler and the watching aunt and the staircase that had ears. "May I take you in?" "Your Grace." He took her in. The dining room at Ravenbury was 40 feet long, 2 fireplaces, 3 chandeliers, and tonight 36 guests, including the Bishop of Wexbury, the Lord Lieutenant of the county, 2 viscounts who had known Sir Henry, 3 matrons who had not, the local doctor, 2 MPs, the rector, Lady Aurelia, Hartwell with his folio at his elbow under the rim of the table, and, at the place Constance had asked Adrian to put him, Sir Lionel Pell, JP, magistrate of the county, 2 seats down from her on the opposite side, in the perfect line of sight for what was to come. Sir Lionel was tall. Sir Lionel was handsome in the way that men are who have spent 30 years being assured that they are handsome. His coat was claret, his cravat was excellent, his smile was already practiced, when Adrian led Constance past him and seated her on his own right, and Sir Lionel inclined his head at her with the polished, condescending warmth of a magistrate who has been told, by his brother-in-law, that the woman in front of him is a fortune hunter and ought to be reduced before the soup. Constance smiled at him with her father's smile. Sir Henry Vere had had a particular way, when a man at table had been rude to him, of smiling as though the man had said something unintentionally charming. It had wounded more men than it had ever flattered. Constance had been practicing it in front of her looking-glass since she was 12. She set her hands very lightly along the rim of her wine-glass, and, from the corner of her eye, took the measure of him. Sir Lionel sat with the easy expansion of a man who believed himself the second most important person at the table, and was content to wait until the Duke had finished his soup before correcting that arrangement. His claret coat had been cut, she noticed, by the same London tailor who had cut her uncle's. His cravat had been pinned with a paste sapphire that was slightly too large. He had small, clever, ungenerous hands. He had laid one of them flat on the cloth beside his glass, as a man does who is preparing to make a point. "Sir Lionel," she said, "I believe you knew my father." "Lady Constance, my dear lady, I had not the honor." "Strange. He spoke of you. He once described you to me in a single sentence." "Indeed?" "Indeed." She did not tell him the sentence. She let it sit between them through the first remove. She watched Sir Lionel try to ask, without asking, what the sentence had been. Hartwell, 3 seats up, tucked his folio more firmly against his knee. The first remove was clear soup. The second was a salmon. By the third remove, Sir Lionel had reached his courage point, or possibly his second glass of claret. He turned, with leisurely confidence, to Lady Aurelia, 2 seats above Constance. "Dear Lady Aurelia, he said, in the carrying voice of a man who has decided that his audience is not the lady at his elbow, but the table at large. I confess myself in an awkward position. As magistrate, I have received certain, well, intelligences about the recent troubles of dear Adrian's house. Intelligences I would not normally repeat in company, except that they touch upon a guest now seated at this very table. The conversation up and down the room thinned, in the way conversation thins at a country dinner when one voice rises, and the others, like horses sensing weather, lift their heads. Sir Lionel, said Lady Aurelia, with the composure of a woman who had burnt his letter that morning. Do go on. Dear lady, I must, with the utmost reluctance, mention that the lady on Adrian's right was seen, I have it on the assurance of 3 separate parties, at the village inn 10 days ago, under a name not her own, asking specific questions about the personal papers of our late Duke. I would not have raised it, dear lady, save for the gravity of the late, unspeakable dismissal of poor Pell, a Ravenbury servant of 14 years who... Constance set down her fork. The room beyond Sir Lionel's shoulder narrowed, in the way rooms do when a single voice has been allowed to rise at the wrong moment, into the near edge of the cloth, and the precise reflection of the candle in her glass, and the small scratch of Lady Aurelia, setting down a silver fruit fork with great deliberation. The Lord Lieutenant, on the Duke's left, lifted his head. The Bishop of Wexbury closed his prayer book. Hartwell, 3 seats up, did not move. Only his right hand slid an inch along the underside of the cloth toward the folio at his knee. Sir Lionel, said Adrian. The dining room went very quiet. It was not what Adrian had said, only the man's name. It was the way he had said it. The Duke of Ravenbury had turned very slightly in his chair and was looking at Sir Lionel with the steady, polite attention of a man inspecting a piece of cracked glass. Sir Lionel, he said again, before you continue, I wonder whether you would do me the kindness of allowing my aunt's solicitor, Mr. Hartwell, on whose other side you have been seated all evening, to clarify the matter for the table. He has been good enough to bring the relevant documents. Hartwell stood. Hartwell, in life, was a small grey man who looked like a recently retired schoolmaster and had a voice meant for sermons and difficult wills. He laid the folio on the white cloth between 2 candelabra. He opened it. With Lady Aurelia's leave, he said. Granted, said Lady Aurelia, who was eating a peach. With his lordship's leave. Granted, said Adrian. With Lady Constance's leave. Granted, Mr. Hartwell. Hartwell, who was enjoying himself rather more than was strictly seemly, laid out 3 papers in the precise manner of a man dealing whist hands. He held up the first. This, he said in his sermon voice, is the deed of trust on the Cheriton Dower House, executed under the late Sir Henry Vere of Ashurst on the 12th of August in the year 23. The signatures are Sir Henry's, the late Duke of Ravenbury's, and 2 witnesses, both of whom remain living and have been written to this week. By the terms of the deed, the Dower House is the property of the present Lady Constance Vere upon her marriage or her 30th birthday. The deed is presently in her possession. It was conveyed to her on Tuesday last. Sir Lionel had set down his glass. Hartwell held up the second sheet. This, he said, is the home farm account of Ravenbury for the 4 quarters preceding Lady Day. The marginal column, in Mr. Pell's own hand, disagrees with the principal column by, as recorded by His Grace's auditors, £643, 14 shillings, 3d. He held up the third sheet. This, he said, is a letter written by Mr. Pell to Lady Constance Vere on the 17th of February last, on Ravenbury notepaper, denying the existence of the deed of trust I have just described. There is a second letter of the 3rd of March, in identical terms. Mr. Pell, since departing His Grace's employment on Tuesday, has been unavailable for further correspondence. The silence at the table did not, at first, speak. The Lord Lieutenant put down his fork. The Bishop of Wexbury, who had not been listening, now distinctly was. Lady Aurelia took a small, considered bite of her peach. "So, Lionel," said Adrian, very gently, "were you about to say something?" Sir Lionel was. Sir Lionel had been about to say a great deal. His mouth had remained, all through Hartwell's recitation, in the precise shape it had been in before. Only his eyes had moved. He was an experienced man at country dinners. He understood now that he had been seated for an hour and 3/4 at a table whose host had been waiting for him to speak first. "Your Grace," he tried. Naturally, in the interests of justice, Sir Lionel," said Adrian, without raising his voice. "You are a magistrate of this county. I have just heard you, in the presence of 36 witnesses, including the Lord Lieutenant and the Bishop, attempt to transfer the disgrace of your brother-in-law onto a young lady whose father was a friend of mine, and on whose behalf, incidentally, I have spent the last 3 days reconstructing the considerable theft that your brother-in-law committed against my estate, with documentary evidence which is now, I believe, on the table beside my aunt's peach." A small, contained snort went around the table from the direction of 2 of the matrons. "Your Grace, you will leave my house this evening," said Adrian, "after coffee, with the appearance of a man whose carriage has been called early. You will write me, in the morning, a letter resigning your magistracy on grounds of health. You will not pursue your brother-in-law's nonsense. You will not write to my aunt again. You will not discuss Lady Constance Vere with any human being above the rank of butler, ever, in any room, at any hour, on any subject. Are these terms acceptable to you?" Sir Lionel breathed once. "They are, Your Grace." "Capital," said Adrian. "Mr. Hartwell, may I trouble you for the salt? Aunt, the peach is excellent." "It is from the south wall," said Lady Aurelia. "I planted it." "You did not plant it. Your sister planted it." "I encouraged her." The conversation, with the swift collective relief of a room that has watched a duel resolved without a shot, lifted again into its previous pitch, and within 4 minutes, Sir Lionel Pell had been reduced from a man with a small career to a man with a small carriage, and by the end of the cheese, he was gone. Constance had not, throughout all of it, eaten one mouthful of her plate. Adrian, beside her, had not eaten his either. Under the cloth, his hand found hers. It was not quite a clasp. It was the steady, absolute, not crushing closing of a hand around a wrist that she had, in the dark, on a rose trellis, learned to recognize. "Constance," he murmured. "Adrian, please eat something. I cannot bear to have starved you for our victory." She laughed, quietly, under the cover of the table's noise, and ate. What she ate she did not afterwards remember. The plates came and were cleared and came again. The candles in the center of the table burnt to the 3rd notch on their pricked wax measures, and were trimmed and left to burn lower. Lady Aurelia, with the steady architectural skill of a woman who had been rescuing dinner conversation since before the French Revolution, redirected the talk through the bishop's account of his visit to Salisbury, the Lord Lieutenant's quiet pleasure in his new spaniel, and the rector's moderately scandalous observation that the rector at Sheraton had been seen in a hat his wife did not approve of. The room repaired itself around them. It was the way well-bred rooms repair themselves around minor ruin, by the sheer collective decision of 40 people not to look directly at the wound until it has had time to scab. Constance felt the Duke's hand under the cloth 4 times during the 3rd remove, twice during the cheese, and once, uncoded, unmistakable, at the moment Sir Lionel rose to take his leave, when the absolute warm closing of his fingers around hers under the white linen said, "Thank you, and that was you, and I am here without speaking a syllable above the table." When she rose from her chair at the end of dinner, her knees, against her training, were not quite steady. Adrian, against any rule of escort precedence in any drawing room in England, took her arm to walk her in. He did it as a matter of bare practical necessity, which was perhaps the only reason no one in the room chose to remark on it. Hartwell, on his way past, stopped only long enough to say, very quietly, that the folio would remain in his keeping in the morning room, and that Lady Constance was on no account to feel she ought to thank him, since he had been waiting for the opportunity since 1822, and considered himself, on balance, in her debt. She did not thank him. She inclined her head with her father's particular small, grave smile, the one Sir Henry had used on solicitors who had been competent on his behalf, and Hartwell, with a corresponding small, grave smile of his own, understood that he had been thanked. Sir Lionel's carriage left at 10:30. The last guest was gone by midnight. Lady Aurelia, who had taken 2 glasses of port and pronounced herself thoroughly entertained, had been escorted upstairs by her own maid, with the firm declaration that she intended to sleep until 11, and Constance was on no account to leave the house before she had taken proper leave. The hall, after a long evening of voices, gave itself back to its smaller noises. Footmen carried trays in soft, slow lines down the back corridor. The dining-room candles were snuffed one by one with a small, breathy hiss. A maid moved along the long upstairs gallery with a brass shovel, lifting embers from the fender of each empty bedroom and setting them, glowing, into a covered pail. The smell of beeswax and snuffed wick climbed the staircase ahead of her. Outside, low cloud had come up off the river and was sitting on the lawn in a slow, grey drift. The cedar by the south wall dripped once, twice, and then steadied. A barn owl, hunting late, called from beyond the orchard wall. The house was quiet by 1:30. The brass desk lamp was burning in the study. Adrian was at the long table. He had not changed out of his dinner coat. He had laid out, with the same neat, obsessive particularity Constance had begun to read as an emotional symptom rather than a habit, Hartwell's 3 papers, the deed, and a fresh single sheet on which he had begun to write something in his own hand. She came in the green dressing gown over her shift, because she had not been able to sleep either, and because, she was honest with herself by now, she had been listening from the south wing for the sound of his door closing for the evening, and his door had not closed. He stood up the moment he saw her. He always stood up. "Adrian? Constance? What are you writing?" "A list." "Of what?" He looked at her. The candlelight was the colour of weak tea on his hands, and on the open ledger, and on the very slight tremor that ran along the underside of his jaw and was, as far as she could tell, the only place he allowed his exhaustion to show. "A list," he said carefully, "of the things I would like to say to you when I am no longer your host, or your patron, or the man who has been responsible for your safety for 4 days. It is a long list. I'm drafting it in advance because I do not, when I finally stand on equal ground with you, intend to be inarticulate. Read it to me. It is unfinished. Read it." He did not look down at the page. He held her eyes. 1. I have not in any of my 28 years met a woman who has read my home farm account in 14 seconds, and whom I subsequently, on a trellis, very nearly let fall. I shall not, in the next 28 years, want to meet another. 2. I do not know what I expected to feel, standing beside you tonight, but it was not the certainty that the only person at my table whose opinion I cared about was sitting under my hand. 3. I would like very much to put any future county dinner of mine under your direction. 4. Constance. He had stopped on her name. She crossed the few feet of carpet to him slowly. The green wrap was not made for crossing carpets quickly. The brass desk lamp behind him was throwing his shadow long across the parquet, and she did not, just now, want to walk through it. The room smelt, she catalogued it as one catalogues the smell of one's own life, without meaning to, of beeswax candles burnt low, the green wax of his seal, the faint dry sweetness of the open cedar drawer where he kept Hartwell's papers, and the small, impossible domestic note of a kitchen garden rose that Mrs. Hannity had set in a glass on the table that morning in defiance of the season. It was the particular composite of a room that had become, in 4 days, a place where Constance had begun to think of herself as standing rather than visiting. I am here. I have been writing to your aunt. What? I have been writing to your aunt for 3 days. Hartwell has been carrying my letters. Your aunt understands by this morning that the dower house is yours, that her solicitor knew the deed existed, and that the magistracy of this county now, for reasons it would be tedious for her to investigate, considers Sir Lionel Pell unwell. I have asked her, in my last letter, to send your trunks, properly, not Bessie smuggling a green silk into a valise. Your wardrobe, your books, your father's signet, the chestnut mare, Cricket's granddaughter, I imagine, and, if she would be so kind, the small portrait of your mother that Sir Henry kept in his dressing room. They will arrive on Wednesday. Adrian, I have not asked you for anything, Constance. You have asked me a great deal. I have not asked the thing. She put her hand on the edge of the table. She wished, suddenly and entirely, that she had been a more frivolous woman. The kind of woman who, at this point in her life, knew what to say without needing to know what she felt. Adrian, she said, what is the thing? He came around the table. He did not touch her. He had not, since the trellis, touched her except for the closing of his hand around hers under the cloth at dinner. And even now, with the door closed and his aunt asleep and the brass desk lamp the only witness, he kept the distance he had been keeping for 3 days. And the distance was its own kind of statement. The thing, said the Duke of Ravenbury, is that I have known you for 4 days, and I have found in those 4 days that the house I have been running for 14 years has been the wrong shape, and the figures I have been keeping have been the wrong figures, and the silences I have been sitting in for 3 years, since my father was lost to the same April cough that took yours, have been the wrong silences. You walked into all of them in muddied petticoats, and you corrected the column. I would like you to stay and correct the rest of the columns. I would like you to do it as my wife. I would like you to do it on terms that are entirely yours, and I am going to enumerate those terms now, so that you may be in no doubt that I have thought about you and not about myself. Enumerate. 1. The Cheriton Dower House remains your sole property. It is not absorbed into Ravenbury. You may keep it, sell it, lease it, give it to a goddaughter, or burn it. I will not be consulted. 2. My estate accounts are open to you, in their entirety, beginning the day you say yes. There is no part of this house, this land, this title, this fortune that is concealed from you. No more locked drawers marked Veer. 3. And this is not, Constance, a clever offer. This is the one that matters. I will not, ever, decide for you behind a closed door. Whatever I think, whatever the correct course is, whatever reason the matter is urgent, I will not make you a decision and present it. I will speak first. I will listen second. I will act third, with you. That is what I am offering. Will you have it? She was crying. She had not realized she had begun. The tears were not the tears of grief, which she knew the shape of by now. They were a quite different shape, narrow and warm, and mostly relief. She wiped them on the back of her wrist. Adrian. Yes. You forgot 4. What is 4? I want Pip on the bed. The Duke of Ravenbury closed his eyes for 2 full seconds. When he opened them, the grey was wet. Yes, he said. And I want you to call the chestnut mare Cricket, even if she has another name. Yes. And I will not say I love you tonight, Adrian. I will say it when I have known you for more than 4 days, and I am not standing in your study at 1 in the morning in your sister's wrap. I will say it on a Wednesday, in daylight, somewhere boring. I will mean it. I want you to wait for it. I will wait for it. Then yes. He did, then, touch her. He set his hand against her cheek, just the cheek, just for a second, the same warm, absolute steadiness, and she leaned into the heel of his palm. He bent and put his mouth to her forehead, the precise point where her hair was beginning to come down, and he kept it there long enough for her to count 3 of his breaths, and for her to feel, very specifically, the corner of his smile against her hairline. Constance. You are going to need to climb out of this study now. My aunt is awake. What? My aunt is awake. I heard her bell pull. Adrian, it is 1 in the morning. My aunt has been awake since the kipper, Constance, and she is not going to be awake when she finds us in this study at 1 in the morning with the door closed. Up the back stair, quickly. You are sending me out of your study at 1 in the morning. I am sending you to your bed, in your wing, in the manner of an unmarried young lady who has not yet been formally engaged, because the engagement has not yet been announced, because I have not yet written to the Gazette. Do not give me a face. I am not giving you a face. You are. It is the face of an engaged woman, Adrian, who is being put out of her future husband's study at 1 in the morning by her future husband's own decree. It is a very becoming face, and we'll see it again tomorrow at a more proper hour. Go. She went. She did not, on her way up the back stair, look down. She had taken Pip with her, in case she needed witnesses. 6 months later, on a Wednesday in November, she said it. It was raining. It was the dull, undramatic rain that does not even stir leaves, the kind that makes drovers' coats heavy and postboys irritable. They were in the kitchen garden. Adrian was tying up the last of the rose canes for winter. Pip was carrying a stick of inappropriate size around the gravel path, with the busy importance of a creature who has been given a Job. Constance, who had come out without a hat because her hat had gone inexplicably into the boot room and not come back, was holding a coil of garden twine and observing her husband's hands at work on the trellis exactly outside the casement window of what was now their bedroom. Adrian. This is the trellis. It is. This is the exact trellis. It is. You did not mend the trellis. I did not mend the trellis. You replaced 2 canes. The trellis remains otherwise as I left it. Yes. Why? He did not turn around. He went on tying twine. Sentiment, said the Duke of Ravenbury. She set down the coil of twine. She put her hands on his shoulder blades, the wide, warm flat of him under the wool, and she leaned her forehead between them, and she said, into his coat, the thing she had promised in his study 6 months and 10 days ago. I love you, Adrian. He turned then. He turned and set his ink-smudged, twine-rough country duke's hands on either side of her face, and he looked at her with the steady, absolute attention that he had given her on the trellis at 1 in the morning, and at the home farm folio at 8, and at the dinner table the night of Sir Lionel's quiet ruin. On a Wednesday, he said, in daylight. Somewhere boring. Somewhere very boring. In the rain. You did not specify dry. I did not. He kissed her. It was not their first kiss. That had happened decorously in a chapel 3 months earlier. But it was the kiss after the sentence she had owed him, and it had a different weight, the weight of something on which the whole house could now lean. Pip, who had finished his important stick, came and sat on her left boot. Constance, murmured Adrian, against her temple. Do you remember what you said to me on the trellis? Wrong room? Wrong room. It was wrong. It was the right wrong room. She laughed into his shoulder. The rain had begun, in the modest English way, to slacken. The brass weather vane on the south wing made a small, unhurried turn. From the kitchen door, Mrs. Hannity, who had become, in addition to her many other competences, the keeper of the small green ledger and the unofficial guardian of the chestnut-mare cricket, and the chief authority on which fork was Lady Aurelia's, called out that tea was ready, and would they kindly not stand in the wet, and bring the dog. Adrian. Tell me a thing. What thing? The thing on your list. Number 1. He paused. He had the grace to look almost embarrassed, which, on the Duke of Ravenbury, was a rare and entirely satisfactory expression. I have not, in any of my 28 years, he said slowly, met a woman who has read my home farm account in 14 seconds and whom I subsequently, on a trellis, very nearly let fall. I shall not in the next 28 years want to meet another. Adrian? You are not going to need the next 28 years. No? No. I am right here. He said nothing. He simply put his arm around her shoulders, which was itself a sentence, and they walked back across the gravel under the slackening rain, with Pip barreling ahead of them with his ridiculous stick, toward the open kitchen door, where Mrs. Hannity had the tea poured, the brass desk lamp had been lit early, and the small green ledger lay open on the table, ready for them both. If you have ever climbed out of the wrong window in your life and been caught by the right hand on the right night, by a person who, at 1 o'clock in the morning, decided you were worth a quarter of an hour of polite curiosity rather than a magistrate, you will know what kind of evening that becomes. Stay with me by the fire. Tell me in the comments the line you would have used at the dinner. Subscribe if you would like another story this week. The fire is warm. The dog has chosen his place. The ledger is open. We are, for the moment, exactly where we ought to be.